Welcome back to Conveniently Unspoken, a channel dedicated to uncovering history's hidden mysteries. In this episode, we delve into the clandestine events that paved the way for the Federal Reserve System in the United States. Join us as we uncover the intricate web of interests, the key players involved, some related conspiracies, and the critical decisions made during the secretive meeting on Jekyll Island in 1910. Let's start by rewinding to the late 19th and early 20th centuries as the United States faced recurring financial panics and economic instability. As we discussed in previous videos, the Panic of 1893 and the Panic of 1907 exposed the vulnerabilities of the existing banking system, triggering debates on the need for a central authority to regulate the economy and prevent future crises. The events leading up to the secretive meeting on Jekyll Island in 1910 were crucial in shaping the trajectory of the nation's monetary system as powerful financial figures such as J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg, and Frank A. Vanderlip recognized the need for a centralized banking system to provide stability and prevent financial meltdowns. These influential individuals had deep ties to major financial institutions and held a shared belief in the advantages of a central banking structure. As we also noted, some of these proponents, notably J.P. Morgan and Paul Warburg, worked with the Rothschild family over the years, integrating their financial resources and control into the booming United States economy. The main proponents for the creation of the Federal Reserve were J.P. Morgan, a powerful financier who advocated for a central bank that could stabilize the financial system during times of crisis. While J.P. Morgan was not directly involved in the secretive Jekyll Island meeting in 1910 that laid the groundwork for the Federal Reserve System, his ideas and contributions to the banking industry were influential in the broader context of financial reform during that era. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 established the Federal Reserve System, but it did not align entirely with Morgan's vision. The Federal Reserve Act created a central banking system with a degree of government oversight and regulatory authority that went beyond what Morgan had advocated. Paul Warburg, a partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company, Warburg advocated for a central banking system modeled after European central banks. He believed in the importance of a central authority that could control the money supply and serve as a lender of last resort to prevent financial crises. His insights and proposals played a significant role in shaping the structure and functions of the Federal Reserve System. Although the final version of the Federal Reserve System was not an exact replica of the European central banking models that Warburg had in mind, his ideas and advocacy were instrumental in shaping the fundamental principles and functions of the Federal Reserve. Senator Nelson Aldrich, an influential political figure who sought banking reform to address economic challenges. One of Aldrich's notable contributions was his sponsorship of the Aldrich-Vreeland Act in 1908. This legislation established the National Monetary Commission, a body tasked with studying the banking and financial systems in the United States and recommending potential reforms. The act was a response to the Panic of 1907, which highlighted the vulnerabilities of the existing banking structure. While Aldrich initially faced criticism for his close ties to Wall Street and financial interests, he believed that a centralized banking system could bring stability to the economy and prevent financial crises. In 1910, Nelson Aldrich, the head of the bipartisan National Monetary Commission and the Senate Republican leader, visited Europe to study its central banking systems. Though initially opposed to centralized banking, he was impressed by Germany's monetary system, which was heavily influenced by the Rothschild family, and returned to the U.S. believing that a federal bank would be an improvement to the U.S.'s turbulent government-issued bond system. Frank A. Vanderlip, a prominent banker and vice president of National City Bank, now Citibank, he played a role in convening the Jekyll Island meeting. Following the Jekyll Island meeting, Vanderlip continued to advocate for banking reform and the establishment of a central banking authority. His efforts, along with those of other participants in the meeting, contributed to the development of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Henry P. Davison's involvement in the Federal Reserve's formation can be attributed to his position as a partner at J.P. Morgan and Company, one of the most influential financial institutions of the time. His insights into the workings of the financial system were essential in crafting the framework for a central banking authority that could provide stability, regulate the economy, and prevent future financial crises. In 1907, Paul Warburg wrote that the United States financial system was at about the same point that had been reached by Europe at the time of the Medicis, and by Asia, in all likelihood, at the time of Hammurabi. Just months after Warburg wrote those words, the country was struck by the Panic of 1907. The panic galvanized the U.S. Congress, particularly Republican Senator Nelson Aldrich, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. In 1908, Aldrich sponsored a bill with Republican Representative Edward Vreeland that, among other things, created the National Monetary Commission to study reforms to the financial system. Aldrich quickly hired several advisors to the commission, including Henry Davison, a partner at J.P. Morgan, and A. Piatt Andrew, an economics professor at Harvard University. Over the next 2 years, they studied banking and financial systems extensively and visited Europe to meet with bankers and central bankers. While many financiers and politicians were proponents of a central banking system, there were also staunch opponents who feared the concentration of power and government intervention. Some of the opponents include banking rivals. Not all financial figures supported the idea of a central bank. Some existing financiers and bankers saw the Federal Reserve as a threat to their own interests and the established banking structures they were part of. These rivals opposed the concept, as they believed it could undermine their positions in the financial landscape. Those with concerns about concentrated power, one of the primary objections to the Federal Reserve was the fear of centralizing too much financial power in the hands of a few individuals or institutions. Opponents believed that a central bank could wield significant influence over the economy and monetary policy, potentially leading to an imbalance of power. Congressional opposition. Within the U.S. Congress, there were legislators who questioned the necessity of a central banking system. They debated the potential benefits and drawbacks of centralizing monetary authority and granting the Federal Reserve certain powers over the economy. These critics include Louis T. McFadden. McFadden, a Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, was a vocal critic of the Federal Reserve System. He believed that the Federal Reserve was a tool of international banking interests and accused it of manipulating the economy and causing financial instability. Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. Lindbergh, a progressive Republican congressman from Minnesota, was a strong opponent of the Federal Reserve Act. He argued that the central banking system would lead to a concentration of financial power and undermine the nation's economic independence. Robert L. Owen, a Democratic senator from Oklahoma, opposed the Federal Reserve Act on the grounds that it would grant too much power to private bankers and lead to an imbalance of control over the nation's money supply. William Borah, a Republican senator from Idaho, expressed concerns about the potential influence of large banks and financial interests on the Federal Reserve System, leading to a loss of economic sovereignty. Henry Cabot Lodge, a Republican senator from Massachusetts, raised concerns about the potential for the Federal Reserve to have too much power and to be dominated by a small group of individuals. Another concern amongst opponents was that of preservation of individual rights. Some opponents were wary of potential infringements on states' rights and individual liberties. This is the same position both presidents, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, had with the first and second national banks. Overall, the opposition to the Federal Reserve System came from a diverse range of individuals and groups, each with their own reasons for skepticism or opposition. Despite these concerns, in November of 1910, a highly secretive meeting took place on Jekyll Island, Georgia. Attendees included Senator Nelson Aldrich, A. Piatt Andrew, Henry P. Davison, Benjamin Strong Jr., Frank A. Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg. These individuals represented a mix of banking, financial, and political interests. The discussions during the meeting laid the foundation for what would eventually become the Federal Reserve System. It's worth noting that some of the unverified opponents of the Federal Reserve, such as John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and I.S.A. Strauss, did not live to witness the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Coincidentally enough, all three men were aboard the maiden voyage of the Titanic, which ultimately foundered on April 14, 1912, 2 years after the meeting on Jekyll Island, and a little over 1 year before the Federal Reserve Act was enacted. Is it coincidental, though? Or was it perfectly engineered that way by the owner of the White Star Line, J.P. Morgan, a huge advocate for the Federal Reserve System? Historical records show that J.P. Morgan did have financial interests in the White Star Line and other related companies. In 1902, White Star Line was bought by the International Mercantile Marine Company, which was owned by J.P. Morgan. In fact, it is important to note that J.P. Morgan had planned to be on the ship's only voyage, but canceled his trip at the last moment due to quote-unquote health reasons. 4 days later, the Titanic, with Guggenheim, Astor, and Strauss, all foundered into the Atlantic. Seems fishy, pun intended. Anyway, the clandestine Jekyll Island meeting played a pivotal role in shaping the Federal Reserve System. The attendees devised a blueprint for a central bank that would have the authority to regulate the money supply, act as a lender of last resort, and provide stability to the financial system. The ideas discussed during this secretive gathering eventually culminated in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which established the Federal Reserve System as we know it today. Aldrich and Davison chose the meeting attendees for their expertise, but Aldrich knew their ties to Wall Street could arouse suspicion about their motives and threaten the bill's political passage. So, he went to great lengths to keep the meeting secret, adopting the ruse of a duck-hunting trip and instructing the men to come one at a time to a train terminal in New Jersey, where they could board his private train car. Once aboard, the men used only first names, Nelson, Harry, Frank, Paul, Pyatt, and Arthur, to prevent the staff from learning their identities. For decades after, the group referred to themselves as the First Name Club. Jekyll Island participants believed that an array of antiquated arrangements impeded America's financial and economic progress. For example, American banks could not operate overseas. Thus, American merchants had to finance imports and exports through financial houses in Europe, principally London. American banks also struggled to collectively clear checks outside the boundaries of a single city. This increased costs of intercity and interstate commerce and required risky and expensive remittances of cash over long distances. By the end of their time on Jekyll Island, Aldrich and his colleagues had developed a plan for a Reserve Association of America, a single central bank with 15 branches across the country. Each branch would be governed by boards of directors elected by the member banks in each district, with larger banks getting more votes. The branches would be responsible for holding the reserves of their member banks, issuing currency, discounting commercial paper, transferring balances between branches, and check clearing and collection. The national body would set discount rates for the system as a whole and buy and sell securities. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23, 1913. In signing the act, President Wilson acknowledged the significance of the Federal Reserve System in stabilizing the financial system and preventing future financial crises. He saw the Federal Reserve as a way to address the problems of the existing banking system and provide better control over the money supply. President Wilson later reflected on the importance of the Federal Reserve Act in statements he later made.
When the President signs this bill, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men.
That's it for this episode. Join us in unraveling the hidden narratives of history as we explore the first few years of the Federal Reserve, as well as the constitutional concerns over the 16th Amendment and how that amendment changed the working class forever. Please feel free to comment and share your thoughts on this video and any other future videos you would like to see. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more intriguing insights. And remember, the truth may be conveniently unspoken, but it's worth seeking.